I still remember the first time I stepped onto Willow's End Farm. It wasn't perfect. Far from it, actually. The paint on the farmhouse was chipping. The barn leaned a little to one side like an old man resting after a long day, and the field stretched endlessly, demanding work that never seemed to end. But it was home. My home. Or at least, that's what I always believed. My parents raised me here, teaching me everything they knew about farming. They weren't rich, but they had pride in their land and in the life they built together. When they passed away unexpectedly, the farm became mine, or so the will said. I didn't think twice about staying. This place held too many memories, too much of who I was. So I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. Every sunrise marked another day of planting, harvesting, and fixing what needed fixing. I poured my heart into this soil, and in return, it gave me purpose. But then, things changed. One ordinary afternoon, as I was hauling hay into the barn, I noticed something unusual near the mailbox, a white envelope with my name scrawled across it in neat handwriting. At first glance, it looked harmless enough. Bills, notices, or maybe even a letter from a friend. I thought nothing of it. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. The letter inside wasn't friendly, not even close. It was typed, cold, and formal, signed by someone claiming to represent my sister, Evelyn. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Asterisk, the property rightfully belongs to Evelyn Harper. Your continued occupation constitutes trespassing. Asterisk trespassing. On my own land. I read it again, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood. But no, the message was clear. Someone was trying to take my farm away. Evelyn. Just hearing her name made my chest tighten. She was my older sister, though sister felt like a loose term these days. We hadn't been close in years. While I stayed behind to help Mom and Dad with the farm, Evelyn left as soon as she could. She hated the dirt under her nails, the smell of manure, and the endless chores. To her, the farm was a prison she couldn't escape fast enough. And now, suddenly, she wanted it back. I crumpled the letter in my hand, anger bubbling inside me. What right did she have to waltz back into my life after all these years and demand what wasn't hers? Sure, we'd argued growing up, what siblings don't. But this wasn't some petty squabble over toys or clothes. This was my entire world, the land I'd worked tirelessly to keep alive, the only thing I had left of our parents. For hours, I sat on the porch steps, staring out at the fields, replaying the letter in my mind. Why would Evelyn do this? Did she really think she could just walk in and claim what I'd fought so hard to protect? And why now, after all this time? Something about it didn't sit right. There had to be more to the story, something I wasn't seeing yet. But for now, all I could do was wait, and worry about what would come next. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I clenched my fists. If Evelyn thought she could scare me off, she was wrong. Dead wrong. This farm was my home, and I wasn't going anywhere without a fight. 2 weeks passed after the letter arrived, and I thought maybe Evelyn had changed her mind. Maybe it was all just a mistake, a misunderstanding that would blow over if I ignored it long enough. But then she showed up. I was in the kitchen early that morning, sipping coffee while staring out the window at the fields. The sun was barely up, casting soft golden light over the dew-covered grass. It was peaceful, until I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A shiny black car pulled into the driveway, looking completely out of place against the backdrop of rusted farm equipment and weathered fences. My stomach tightened as the door opened, and Evelyn stepped out. She looked different. Gone were the jeans and flannel shirts she used to wear when she still lived here. Instead, she wore a sleek blouse tucked into tailored pants, paired with high heels that sank awkwardly into the dirt. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She glanced around like she was inspecting the property for the first time, or sizing it up. "Clara," she called out, her voice sharp and clipped. Not a question, not a greeting, just my name, thrown like a challenge. I set down my mug and walked outside, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Evelyn," I replied, crossing my arms. "What are you doing here?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she strolled toward me, her heels clicking unevenly on the uneven ground. When she stopped, she tilted her head slightly, studying me like I was a stranger. "This place hasn't changed much," she said finally, her tone dripping with judgment. "Still falling apart, I see." Her words stung, but I refused to let her see how much. "It's standing," I shot back, "unlike some people who abandoned it." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment I thought she might snap at me. But then her expression softened, or at least she pretended it did. "Listen, Clara," she began, her voice shifting to something sweeter, almost rehearsed. "I didn't come here to fight. I came to talk about the future of Willow's End." "The future?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You mean your plan to kick me out?" Her smile faltered, but only for a second. "That's not fair," she said, shaking her head. "You know Father always intended for me to inherit the farm. He just never got around to updating the will properly." My heart pounded in my chest. "That's a lie," I said firmly. "The will says the farm is mine. You haven't been here in years, Evelyn. You don't care about this place. You don't even know what it takes to run it." She sighed dramatically, like I was being unreasonable. "It doesn't matter what I feel or don't feel," she countered. "The law is on my side. And unless you're willing to leave peacefully, I'll have no choice but to involve lawyers." Her words hit me like ice water. For a moment, I couldn't speak. All those years of hard work, of pouring my soul into this land, and now she wanted to strip it away from me. Just like that. When Evelyn left later that day, I couldn't shake the anger boiling inside me. How could she do this? How could she stand there and act like she deserved something she hadn't lifted a finger for? Determined to find answers, I spent the rest of the afternoon digging through boxes in the attic. Somewhere among the dusty photo albums and old letters, I hoped to uncover proof that Evelyn was wrong, that Dad had never meant for her to take the farm. And then I found it. Tucked inside a folder labeled *Important Documents* was a second will. This one was dated years after the first, handwritten in Dad's familiar scrawl. According to it, the farm belonged to Evelyn, with a note saying he hoped I'd understand someday. My hands trembled as I read it over and over, disbelief washing over me. Why hadn't he told me? How could he choose her over me? That night, I sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars. Betrayal weighed heavy on my chest. If Evelyn thought she could walk in and take what was mine, she was wrong. So very wrong. Word traveled fast in our small town. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know about Evelyn's sudden reappearance and her claim to Willow's End Farm. At first, I tried to ignore the whispers when I went into town for supplies, but it was impossible not to notice the sideways glances or overhear snippets of conversations as I passed by. "Did you hear about Clara and her sister?" one woman murmured to another at the grocery store. "Such a shame. It's tearing the family apart." Another man shook his head disapprovingly while sipping coffee at the diner. "That Evelyn always did have high ambitions. Guess she finally decided to come back for what she thinks is hers." Some people sided with me, of course. Old Mr. Thompson, who'd been friends with Dad since childhood, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Don't let her push you around, Clara. You've earned every inch of that farm." Even Mrs. Harper, my elderly neighbor, brought over a casserole and promised to support me however she could. But others weren't so kind. A few farmers muttered that blood ties mattered more than sweat equity. One even suggested I should step aside gracefully because family comes first. Their words felt like knives twisting deeper with each passing day. The community I'd thought of as my own was fracturing right before my eyes, and I didn't know who to trust anymore. Meanwhile, Evelyn wasted no time escalating things. Notices started arriving almost daily, official-looking letters from her fancy lawyer detailing how I was violating some obscure clause or another. Each one ended with the same threat. leave voluntarily, or face legal action. It was exhausting, keeping track of all the accusations while still trying to keep the farm running. Every time I turned around, there was another demand, another deadline looming over me. The stress began to take its toll. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every argument with Evelyn, and wondering if I'd missed something obvious. Had Dad really favored her all along? Was I fooling myself into thinking I deserved this place? Determined to fight back, I scraped together what little savings I had and hired Rachel, a young attorney recommended by Mrs. Harper. She specialized in estate disputes and had a reputation for being tough but fair. When we met in her cramped office downtown, I spilled everything: the wills, the letters, Evelyn's threats, and waited anxiously for her verdict. Rachel listened carefully, her sharp eyes scanning the documents I'd brought. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "This isn't going to be easy," she admitted. "They're going to argue intent, that your father meant for Evelyn to inherit eventually. But I've been here for years." I burst out, frustration bubbling over. "I've done everything. Planted crops, fixed roofs, kept the whole operation alive. Doesn't any of that count?" "It might," Rachel said cautiously, "if we can prove undue influence. Did Evelyn pressure him into changing the will?" I hesitated. As far as I knew, Dad made the decision himself, but something about Evelyn's timing nagged at me. Why wait until now to assert her claim? What had changed? As I left Rachel's office that afternoon, my mind raced with possibilities. If I couldn't find evidence of coercion, I'd need another way to prove that Willow's End belonged to me, not just legally, but morally. This wasn't just about land. It was about the life I'd built, the memories I cherished, and the legacy I refused to let slip away. Standing outside under the late afternoon sun, I clenched my fists. No matter what Evelyn threw at me, I wouldn't give up without a fight. Willow's End was more than dirt and fences. It was home, and I intended to protect it. Evelyn didn't waste any time making herself comfortable. Within days of her arrival, she moved into the guest house near the edge of the property, acting as if she already owned the place. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of her high heels clicking across the porch, followed by her sharp voice giving orders to no one in particular. She criticized everything: the way I stacked firewood, the condition of the garden, even the color of the curtains in the farmhouse. It was like living with a storm cloud that refused to pass. One afternoon, while I was repairing a broken fence post, Evelyn marched over with a clipboard in hand. "You really should hire someone to handle this," she said, gesturing toward the tools scattered around me. "It's not efficient for you to do it yourself." I straightened up, brushing dirt off my hands. "Efficient or not, it gets done," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. "And I don't need your advice on how to run things." She raised an eyebrow, unbothered by my irritation. "Suit yourself, but when the farm belongs to me, these decisions will be mine to make." Her words sent a chill down my spine, not just because of the arrogance behind them, but because they reminded me how serious she was about taking everything away from me. Still, I forced myself to focus on the task at hand, hammering the last nail into place before walking back to the barn. The tension between us was suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing beneath the surface. A few days later, I overheard Evelyn talking on the phone late at night. Curiosity got the better of me, so I tiptoed closer to the guest house, careful not to make a sound. Through the cracked door, I caught fragments of her conversation, enough to send my heart racing. "Sell the land for development," she was saying, her voice low but excited. "Highest bidder won't care about sentimental value." My breath hitched. Development? She wanted to sell Willow's End to developers. For years, rumors had circulated about companies eyeing our area for new housing projects or shopping centers. Dad always resisted their offers, insisting the land stay untouched. And now Evelyn planned to undo everything he worked for. The rest of her words blurred together, but one thing became painfully clear: Evelyn didn't care about preserving the farm. To her, it wasn't a home or a legacy. It was nothing more than a paycheck waiting to happen. When she hung up, I hurried back to the farmhouse, my mind spinning. How could she betray our family like this? Selling the land would destroy everything. The fields where Dad taught me to plant corn, the barn where Mom kept her jars of homemade jam, the quiet mornings spent watching the sunrise over the hills. All of it would vanish under concrete and asphalt. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the worn wooden table where we used to gather as a family. Anger burned inside me, hotter than ever before. Evelyn wasn't fighting for the farm because she loved it. She was using it as a stepping stone to line her own pockets. If she succeeded, she wouldn't just take my home. She'd erase every trace of who we were. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not without a fight. The next morning, I called Rachel, my lawyer, and filled her in on what I'd overheard. "This changes things," she said after listening intently. "If we can prove she's planning to sell, it might sway public opinion in your favor. People care about preserving farmland. It's part of their identity, too." Rachel's words gave me hope, but they also hardened my resolve. Evelyn thought she could walk in and tear apart everything I held dear, but she underestimated one thing: how far I'd go to protect it. Willow's End wasn't just my home. It was a piece of history, a connection to the people who came before us. And I wouldn't let her turn it into something unrecognizable. Determined to fight back, I turned to the one thing Evelyn didn't have: the support of the community. Willow's End wasn't just my home. It was part of the town's identity. Generations of families had watched it grow, shared stories about its history, and appreciated the way it kept the spirit of rural life alive. If anyone could understand why this land mattered, it was them. I started small, talking to neighbors and friends who'd known my parents. At first, I was nervous. What if they sided with Evelyn? What if they thought I was being unreasonable? But as I explained the situation, the second will, Evelyn's threats, her plans to sell the farm, I saw something shift in their eyes. They cared, not just about me, but about what losing Willow's End would mean for everyone. Mrs. Harper, my elderly neighbor, was the first to step up. "Your father loved this farm," she said firmly one afternoon over tea. "He wouldn't want it sold off to strangers." She promised to spread the word, and even offered to host a meeting at her house so I could share my story with more people. The gathering took place on a chilly evening, but the room was warm with determination. Farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, all kinds of townsfolk packed into Mrs. Harper's cozy living room. As I stood in front of them, clutching a stack of papers and photos, I felt a mix of nerves and hope. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't alone. I told them everything, from the day Evelyn showed up to the letters from her lawyer, and finally, to the conversation I'd overheard about selling the land. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, slowly, the room erupted into murmurs of disbelief and anger. "This isn't right," one farmer said, shaking his head. "That land is part of who we are." "We can't let her do this," added another woman. "What's next?" Turning the whole town into strip malls. By the end of the night, a plan began to take shape. Together, we drafted a petition urging local officials to designate Willow's End as protected agricultural land. If successful, it would prevent any attempts to sell or develop the property. Dozens of signatures poured in within days, each name a testament to the community's unity. Even some of Evelyn's initial supporters changed their tune once they realized what was at stake. But Evelyn wasn't about to let me win without a fight. The very next week, she launched her own campaign to sway public opinion. She drove through town in her sleek car, handing out flyers that painted me as reckless and unqualified to manage the farm. "Clara's decisions put Willow's End at risk," one flyer read. "Only Evelyn can ensure its future success." Her tactics worked on some people. A few older farmers, swayed by her polished promises, began questioning whether I was truly capable of running the farm. One even confronted me at the market, saying, "Maybe Evelyn's right. You've been struggling to keep things afloat, haven't you?" His words stung, but I refused to let them break me. Instead, I doubled down, working harder than ever to show the town that Willow's End was thriving under my care. I invited curious neighbors to visit the farm, showing them the healthy crops, well-maintained equipment, and animals contentedly grazing in the fields. Slowly, doubts began to fade. Still, Evelyn's interference grated on me. Every insult, every accusation felt like sandpaper against my skin. But deep down, I knew she was only making herself look worse. Her greed and manipulation were starting to show, and no amount of charm could hide it forever. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized something important. This fight wasn't just about keeping my home. It was about standing up for what mattered. Willow's End represented resilience, hard work, and connection, not just for me, but for everyone who valued the beauty of simple, honest living. And as long as I had the truth, and the town, on my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, a breakthrough came from the last person I expected, Mrs. Harper. One crisp morning, she knocked on my door, clutching a dusty, faded notebook in her hands. Her expression was serious, almost nervous, as she held it out to me. "This belonged to your father," she said softly. "He gave it to me years ago and asked me to hold on to it in case anything happened. I think you should read it." My heart raced as I took the notebook from her. It looked old, its cover worn and pages yellowed with age. Inside were detailed entries written in Dad's familiar scrawl, notes about the farm, reminders for planting seasons, and even little doodles of tractors and cows. But as I flipped further, the tone shifted. The later entries weren't just about farming. They were confessions, raw and honest, that revealed the truth behind Evelyn's claim. In one entry, Dad wrote about how Evelyn had been pressuring him for months to leave her the farm. She called constantly, sometimes crying, other times yelling, threatening to cut ties if he didn't comply. He admitted feeling trapped, torn between his daughters. Asterisk Evelyn says Clara won't understand, asterisk he wrote. Asterisk, but what choice do I have? If I don't give her what she wants, she'll never forgive me. Asterisk. The final entry hit me hardest. Asterisk, I fear I've made a mistake. Asterisk, Dad confessed. Asterisk, Clara deserves better than this. She's poured her soul into this land, and now I've betrayed her trust. I hope someday she'll find a way to forgive me. Asterisk. Tears blurred my vision as I closed the notebook. This was it, the proof I needed. Evelyn hadn't just convinced Dad to change the will. She'd manipulated him, guilt-tripped him until he felt he had no choice. My hands trembled as I showed the journal to Rachel during our next meeting. Her eyes widened as she read through the entries. "This is huge," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "This proves undue influence. We can use it to challenge the validity of the second will." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Armed with the journal, we filed a countersuit against Evelyn, accusing her of coercing Dad into altering the will. The revelation shocked the entire town. People who had doubted me before began to see Evelyn for what she truly was, a woman driven by greed, willing to manipulate even her own father to get what she wanted. Evelyn, however, wasn't ready to back down. When news of the journal broke, she stormed into the farmhouse, her face red with fury. "You're lying," she shouted, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "That notebook is fake. Dad would never say those things." "It's not fake," I replied, standing firm despite the lump in my throat. "It's his handwriting, his words. You know it's true, Evelyn. Stop pretending you care about this place. You just want to sell it and make a profit." She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. For a moment, I thought she might cry. But then her expression hardened, and she spat. "Fine. Do what you want, but don't think this is over." As she stormed out, slamming the door behind her, I sank onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. The truth was finally out, and there was no hiding it anymore. That night, as I sat on the porch under a blanket of stars, I thought about Dad. I wished he were here to see how hard I'd fought for the farm, for him. But even though he wasn't, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let anyone take away the legacy he'd built. Not Evelyn, not anyone. Willow's End was more than just land. It was a testament to love, hard work, and family. And I intended to protect it, no matter what. The trial was long, grueling, and emotionally exhausting. For weeks, I sat in a cold, sterile courtroom, listening to lawyers argue over wills, intentions, and family dynamics. Evelyn's attorney tried to paint me as selfish, someone clinging to the farm out of stubbornness rather than love. They questioned my ability to run the property, pointing out past struggles with finances and repairs. At times, it felt like they were tearing apart not just my case, but my entire life. But then it was our turn. Rachel presented the journal entry by entry, showing how Evelyn had pressured Dad into changing the will. She called witnesses, neighbors, friends, even Mrs. Harper, who testified about Evelyn's sudden reappearance and her clear plans to sell the land for development. The turning point came when Rachel played excerpts from Evelyn's own phone call, which I'd secretly recorded that night outside the guest house. Her voice rang through the courtroom, cold and calculating, as she discussed selling Willow's End to the highest bidder. Evelyn looked pale as the judge reviewed all the evidence. When the verdict finally came, my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the words. The second will is declared invalid due to undue influence, the judge announced. Willow's End Farm remains the property of Clara Harper. Relief washed over me in waves, so overwhelming I nearly collapsed. Across the room, Evelyn stared at me with narrowed eyes, her lips pressed into a thin line. But she didn't say a word. Instead, she gathered her things and left the courtroom without looking back. In the months that followed, I worked tirelessly to heal the wounds Evelyn's actions had caused, not just for myself, but for the community. Neighbors who had doubted me came forward to apologize, offering help wherever needed. Some volunteered to fix the old barn, while others brought food or pitched in during harvest season. Slowly, trust began to rebuild, stronger than ever before. Even Mrs. Harper became a regular visitor, stopping by every few days to share stories about Dad. Hearing her talk about his quirks and kindness reminded me why this place mattered so much. It wasn't just dirt and crops. It was a living, breathing piece of history, a connection to the people who shaped us. One crisp autumn morning, as golden sunlight bathed the fields in warmth, I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. The air smelled of fresh earth and fallen leaves, and the distant sound of birdsong filled the silence. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. Willow's End was safe. My home was mine again. I still think about Evelyn sometimes, not with anger, but with sadness, for the sister she used to be, and the choices she made that drove us apart. Maybe someday we'll find a way to reconcile, though I'm not holding my breath. For now, I'm focused on moving forward, nurturing the land, and honoring the legacy Dad left behind. As I walked through the fields later that day, running my fingers over the tall stalks of corn swaying gently in the breeze, I realized something important. Willow's End wasn't just a farm. It was a symbol of resilience, love, and connection. No amount of money or power could replace what it represented. And as long as I drew breath, I would protect it with everything I had. Because some things are worth fighting for. And Willow's End was one of them.